Good morning and welcome to BloombergQuint, India's first digital live streaming business news service. I'm Neeraj Chan, you're watching Indian Open. Let's go straight to the headlines. The cabinet approves a revival package for BSNL MTNL, which includes a merger, but stops short of putting a timeline for completion of the same. The government also hikes the minimum support prices for rabi crops sown in the winter season to bring it to 1.5 times the average cost of production. PVR launches a qualified institutional placement to raise 700 crore rupees. The proceeds will be used to fund expansion and reduce debt, in line with the story that BloombergQuint broke yesterday. And better realizations help Hero MotoCorp partially offset the sharp drop in sales volumes. International order wins help Larsen and Toubro skirt the domestic slowdown. And the counting will begin for assembly polls held in Maharashtra and Haryana. Exit polls predict NDA retaining power in both the states. And not that that should come as a surprise really with the recent trends, but you never know, it's elections. Let's wait and watch what happens. Let's take a look at the trade setup for the day and see what's happening around the world and in India. So firstly, the SGX that is, and what it indicates for India, I mean. The US markets, the earnings weren't the best, but still the markets inched up a little bit. So about 0.28% for the S&P 500, nearing the record highs yet again and nearing that ceiling mark from where it's typically retreated. Let's wait and watch if it follows an encore this time around. Dow Jones about 45 odd points. NASDAQ after a 0.7% cut day before, marginally in the green, and Asia's taking on from there because across the board when I see the Asian screen, Nikkei, Hang Seng, Shanghai, Kospi, Straits Times, all of them have some tick of green to themselves. And there's a chart on the Bloomberg terminal which shows how there have been, in a manner of speaking, higher highs for most of the Asian screen, but they're still not at a level from which they would technically retreat or have the channel at the upper end of the channel. They are moving towards there, not quite there. So maybe, just maybe for the Asian markets, there could be some further upsides. I mean, these can change anytime, but this is essentially the long and short of what this chart is trying to suggest. Well, the bulls will be hoping that this continues. SGX Nifty 2 indicating a start, which is marginally in the green. And yesterday was a bit unlike the few other days, so don't quite know how today could shape up in the second half, because hitherto we've been used to the second half doing very well. May not be so today as well. Frankly, the one highlight for our markets has been the last few days is that one, the market breadth is improving, and that the broader market stocks which are showing those breakouts are actually seeing some more buying post the breakout as well. And we've seen that. I mean, the NBFCs are a classic case in point, right? After hitting 72, 73, Edelweiss went up and it's continued to move up. Piramal has gone up, continuing to move up. So a lot of these mid-cap stocks are seeing some breakout buying post the breakout happening, and that is a heartening sign for the broader markets. For the Nifty itself, the OI distribution, I think, for the weekly expiry seems to suggest that we'll be wedged in this very tight range, 11,600 to about 11,700 or 800, whichever way you look at it. So don't think that there'll be too much of a deviation from this. It was evident in trade yesterday and likely evident in trade today. And to my mind at least, while the state election verdict seems to be, if the exit polls are to be believed, a foregone conclusion, I doubt that this will have a material impact on the markets one way or the other. So yes, it's an important event. We will talk about it. But from a market's perspective, I don't think this has too much of a bearing. So what to watch out for? Well, Nifty results, a couple of very important names today, ITC as well as Maruti Suzuki, so do watch out for those. And a clutch of broader market names which are very, very important. Interglobe Aviation, Reliance Nippon is at 339. What a catch-up it has done for all the naysayers from 260 when the name change happened to 339. It's been a remarkable up move for RNAM. Colgate Palmolive, the volume growth numbers will be watched out for. Sterlite Tech, important mid-cap name. United Spirits, very important too, as is Westlife Development, which is almost hitting fresh highs every single day. So do watch out for these names. And of course, very closely watch out for what Bandhan Bank as well as Astral Poly would do. Astral in particular, after a number of good quarters, could it see some pressure today? I think all of these names would be important from a results perspective. And then, of course, the 3 or 4 key names that I would watch out for. I mean, Larsen & Toubro numbers came out, but I don't think it will have a material stock reaction. So I'm trying to talk about stocks which could react in the session today. I guess HCL Tech could react. There are 2 or 3 things really working for this one. The FY20, the growth guidance has been revised to the constant currency growth guidance revised upwards in a band of 15 to 17% from 14 to 16%, and this should please the street. Add to that, they've announced a bonus issue, typically pleases the retail investor. So my guess is HCL Tech should react positively in the session today. The lower input cost aided margins for Hero MotoCorp. The management has hinted at a better second half of FY20 on improved sales. I know brokerages have a mixed view here. A couple of them have not been as sanguine, but I reckon that these numbers should please the street. So let's wait and watch what happens to Hero MotoCorp in the session today. Bajaj Auto numbers showed some realization upticks as well. Maybe, just maybe, Hero MotoCorp will show that kind of flavor in today's session, trade as well. Some very good quarterly performances coming in from NIT Technologies, PI Industries, as well as Polycab. All of them had individual traits of their own, which led to them outperforming compared to what the expectations were. And after a reasonably good day yesterday, especially for Polycab, maybe we'll have more in store. And last but not the least, it's a tiny tune. I personally don't think too many people should trade in this one, but it's an important one from a trading perspective. There's an announcement on that merger. Do watch out. Maybe MTNL has some reactions in the session today, though. Please be careful if you're trying to trade MTNL on the base of this piece of news. Maybe it could give you dramatic returns in the near term, but you don't know what the fundamentals are. So it's more a tactical call as opposed to a fundamental investment if you're doing that. So keep that at the back of your mind. Okay, let's tell you what's lined up on First Word today. It's the collection of the top editorial stories that we believe we should bring to you. Nikunj Johri first tells us about the 2 big decisions taken by the cabinet last evening. Then Yatin Mota Johnson to tell us the details of PVR's fundraising plan. Darshan Mehta then Johnson to tell us which segments are driving Larsen & Toubro's order wins and revenues. And then Kaushik Johnson to tell us what to watch as Maharashtra and Haryana Assembly votes start getting counted. The government has announced a plan to merge Bharat Sanchar Nigam Limited and Mahanagar Telephone Nigam Limited, BSNL and MTNL. This is a part of a revival plan for the state-run telecom operators reeling under debt and fighting cutthroat competition from private players. Nikunj Johri has this report.
As part of a revival package for 2 state-owned telecom companies, BSNL and MTNL, the government has said that these 2 companies would be merged into one entity. As MTNL is currently listed on exchanges, the due process for the merger would be followed, and as of now, MTNL would act as a subsidiary of BSNL. The government would also infuse about 20,100 crore rupees into these 2 entities, and these companies would use it for developing their 4G infrastructure, and the GST payout of about 3,600 crore rupees arising for this 4G spectrum would be waived by the government. The government has also said that these 2 companies would raise about 15,000 crore through long-term sovereign-backed bonds and would use it for their debt restructuring and their capex requirements. The debt of these 2 companies put together is about 40,000 crore rupees, and the government has also given these 2 companies a target of monetizing their assets worth 38,000 crore rupees over a period of 3 years.
The cabinet also increased the minimum support prices for winter crops. And Nikunj has these details.
The government has also approved a hike in minimum support prices for rabi crops, or the crops that are sown during the winter season. The minimum support price for wheat has been hiked by 85 rupees per quintal to 1,925 rupees per quintal, and the minimum support price for barley has also been increased by 85 rupees per quintal to 1,525 rupees per quintal. The minimum support price for lentils has been increased by 325 rupees per quintal to 4,800 rupees. The announcement, the hike in minimum support prices, is in line with the government's principle of fixing minimum support price at 1.5 times the weighted average cost of production for these crops, which was announced in the union budget for 2018 and 19.
All right, so those are the important decisions taken. For all of you who missed them yesterday, now you know what's been done. Now, some of you might have missed the results, but worry not. We will out here cover for you Larsen & Toubro to kickstart. They reported a profit growth in the September quarter as overseas orders helped the infrastructure giant offset the domestic slowdown. Darshan Mehta is standing by with the fine print of these numbers. Darshan, the big one yesterday, L&T, what do you make out of it?
Yeah, so it was nothing exceptional, and I think the commentary was also slightly on the weaker side, even though that they maintained the guidance. Now, on the numbers, the top line growth was 15%, was in line with estimates. The profit growth was much higher at almost 13%, and that was aided by higher other income this time around. Taxes were also on the lower side. EBITDA was up 13%, which means EBITDA margins of 11.4%, pretty much in the range. So no surprises as far as the financials were concerned. The order inflow was on the decent side. Close to 49,000 crores of orders is something that they bagged. The range was 30,000 to 50,000, so it's on the higher end. And international orders were almost 35% of it. See, the order book now has topped the 3 lakh crore mark number. As far as what helped the orders, a couple of sectors that the management said helped the sector was basically hydrocarbon, building, factories and power. And they maintained the guidance on all fronts, on the margin front, the top line front, as well as the order inflow front. So that's the broad basis of the numbers.
So let's try and break this down, Darshan. Which segments, what was the performance, what stood out?
So I think infrastructure was on the weaker side, even though there was a top line growth that came out. If we see, we'll have a table for you which indicates where the numbers came in. So infrastructure, the margins were at 7.1%, which was slightly weaker. Power was down 50%. Growth came in from the heavy engineering and the financial services and the allied businesses. Hydrocarbons did well. Now individually, if you're looking at it, infrastructure is where there was orders were down almost 33%, and they're saying there were delays, and realization of claims actually aided the margin. So overall on the core business, yes, it wasn't a good number on the infrastructure side. Power, very poor set of numbers. Power, if you're looking at it, revenues declined on a depleting order book. On the hydrocarbon business, orders were down 48%. So that was something that was weak, and even here some bit of claims aided the margin of the company. Defense was decent, but they believe that the private sector continues to be plagued by policy inaction. Order inflow was down 52%. On the hydrocarbon business, that was something that aided them significantly. One of the highest numbers of orders that they got, and the revenue growth was decent. The balance was IT, which included the Mindtree space, and margins they believe declined for the quarter. On the financial service side, they're saying growth in the loan assets increased, so that portion did well. And on the development business, that was aided because of the Hyderabad Metro being partially commissioned. So overall, not the best of numbers. The commentary was weak, and the core business infrastructure, I believe, is slowing down.
Any very quick, Darshan, any deviation in the current quarter compared to what's happened over the last 3 or 4 quarters, either in the commentary or in the body language or in the performance?
So I think it's the second year in a row in which they haven't cut the guidance. Last year they didn't cut guidance, they met the guidance, but at least 5 years before that, on a continuous basis, they cut the guidance in the second quarter. Okay. So that hasn't happened. They say that it's positive, but I think the commentary this time around was slightly on the weaker side, and what I'm seeing is that the order inflow has cooled off significantly. So probably in the third quarter there could be some bit of slowdown that we can anticipate in L&T.
Okay, let's wait and watch. Thanks, Darshan, for putting that into perspective. And keep in mind, I mean, if it's happening across the board for a bunch of companies, the country's largest player can only do it for as long, which is continue to show the dominant order inflow growth. And this time around too, it's the international orders that have helped Larsen & Toubro. Let's see. May not be too much of a downside, but for the longest time, while we've been hearing people speak about the capex revival and L&T gaining, I don't think it's done dramatically well in terms of performance. Just if you can just pull up the YTD chart of Larsen & Toubro, you will see, I mean, it's a premier player, but this year it's been absolutely flat. So you may want to bet all your horses on capex and the blue chip stock that L&T is. As a stock investment, it's yielded nothing for an investor. And let's wait and watch if it does something different in the next 6 months. But a stock which has done well is the country's largest multiplex player, and it is going out to raise funds to increase its presence. PVR has launched a qualified institutional placement last evening. Yatin Mota joins us with these details. Yatin, good morning. As per script, because we spoke about this yesterday.
Yes, Neeraj, and what we gather from reliable sources is that the total QIP size is close to 700 crores. Remember, PVR has been talking aggressively about screen addition plans, 80 to 100 screens per annum. The debt portion has also moved up with the recent SPI Cinemas acquisition. So the fundraising is primarily targeted to meet, and augment the expansion plans. And more importantly, they also, aim to retire a certain amount of debt from the, balance sheet, and hence this 700 crore odd of fundraising, which has been announced by the company yesterday on the stock exchanges. Of course, they have not announced the quantum of the QIP, but sources do indicate that the amount is 700 crores. When it comes to the base price of the QIP issue, the company informed the stock exchanges that the base price would be close to 1810 crores. This clearly means that even if you consider up to 5% permissible discount as per regulation, the QIP is most likely to happen at a price of 1720 rupees per share. According to BloombergQuint's calculation, PVR's fundraising plan may lead to a 7 to 8% kind of overall dilution. So far, the book has been good in terms of subscriptions. A lot of domestic funds have participated according to sources, and clearly the growth capital which PVR required is now probably on the table.
And then in the recent commentary or otherwise, have they indicated any reasons as to why they would expand this meaningfully? Because we know the movie pipeline in the last few months has been robust, and Inox has been on record saying that too. But it's not been very predictable for the rest of the year. So any reason why such a largish amount raised, and any idea about what's the kind of investors that might be subscribing to this QIP issue?
So Neeraj, the first part in terms of the expansion, clearly there has been a healthy competition in the market space, especially to do with Inox versus PVR. Inox, of course, has its own presence in certain specific areas, especially in West India. But more importantly, they have been successfully, been able to do a lot of acquisitions. Earlier, they had, Cinemax acquisition, which is doing well, especially in Mumbai. They recently acquired SPI Cinemas. Of course, both organically as well as inorganically, the company is looking to aggressively expand its footprint. If you look at this quarter's presentation, they already have 800 screens at QIP, probably $100 million under. And if you look at the existing shareholders, we also have Fidelity, Birla Mutual Fund, HDFC Mutual Fund. So already a lot of marquee funds have, secondary shares of, PVR. Probably, a bunch of these have already, put some good amount of money in the QIP.
So mix of long only as well as other kind of money coming.
Yeah, arbitrage funds also are there, most likely according to sources.
Okay, this is all likely. Keep that in mind. The nature of the investors that is we are talking about. But thanks so much for putting this into perspective. And we of course spoke about this yesterday itself. If you follow the BloombergQuint Twitter handle, you'll have gotten some updates about this. And of course, if you log on to our website, you will get details of almost all of these stories and much more. The last piece on First Word, and maybe the skeptics would argue not as important as the previous times, but important nevertheless, because counting has begun for all the votes cast in Maharashtra and Haryana Assembly polls held on Monday. While almost all exit polls have predicted that the existing government will retain power, it's important to gauge just how many seats the BJP gets on its own in Maharashtra. Haryana, on the other hand, may be slightly closer fight if the India Today Access My Voter exit poll is to be believed. Now, Kaushik Wadia looks at all of these and more, and is here to take us through the details. Morning, Kaushik. You could argue maybe not as exciting as November last year, wherein Congress came out and put up a fight.
At that point, every market watcher was trying to get a sense from the assembly elections what the mood into a Lok Sabha election is.
Fair point.
At a time like this, what you're trying to get a sense of is how much of that momentum is being carried. Perhaps, given the fact that there's been, not just the fact that there's been economic slowdown, you've had incidents like the trouble with the bank, which starts to hit certain people, particularly in a city like Mumbai. And whether that starts translating into any sort of change in votes at all. So that would perhaps set the tone to know how much of the political capital does Prime Minister Modi or the BJP retain as the economy ebbs and flows, as other issues come and go. We've started getting some sort of numbers of the first few rounds in. As with May, treat some of these numbers with a little bit of salt, because these will be volatile. And let's see some of those numbers right now. Remember, the incumbent government in Maharashtra is the Devendra Fadnavis government, which has the Shiv Sena as an ally. Right now, that number of 15 that you see shows a very healthy lead over the Congress NCP combined. But that, as you said, the shift that we're trying to see is how much more will the BJP on its own get to the halfway mark of 144. Right now, that shift is only +2. Within that 15, it's about 13 that they've retained from the last time and 2 that they've been able to switch.
Okay.
The BJP the last time was 122. It will try to get as close to that 144 mark on its own, Neeraj. In Haryana, remember the halfway mark is 45. The last time the Khattar government had 47. We've had 3 polls that are offered, 3 opinion polls that offered a 3/4 majority over 70 to the BJP. And there was one that came out a day later from India Today that you mentioned that predicted a hung assembly. Right now, very early days, the first 3 seats that are being counted being shown as leads for the BJP under Khattar.
Yeah, so 2 questions, Kaushik, rolled into one. Are there, and I don't know if we've been able to do or anybody's been able to do such analysis, but are there specific seats or specific pockets which are more closely watched than others? I mean, from a Mumbaiker's perspective, for example, this whole RA thing that happened would have raised eyebrows for certain people and people might be watching that. But just because you look at the whole state and you would have looked at them, are there any seats which are more important than the others in terms of gauging whether the sentiment is still or the momentum is still continuing or specific issues have hurt the sentiment?
Okay, so the same as parts of what we tried to look at in May, right? Where Maharashtra and Haryana were states that the BJP and its allies swept completely. So it's depending on what issue you're looking at. Are you looking at whether state governments and not Mr. Modi at the center are in any way held responsible for any kind of farm distress? Well, is there an opposition that's strong enough, as Mr. Pugalia said on BloombergQuint for the last few days, to be able to make that an issue? So do you look at pockets of Vidarbha, do you look at pockets of Western Maharashtra where there have been, water has been an issue, and as a result, farming has been an issue? But has that become a political issue this election? Not to the extent that you'd think as much as the distress has been, right? Do you look at urban issues where, again, things like deforestation, the balance between development and the ecology, the RA point that you mentioned, the Shiv Sena has tried to make it an issue at a point when it's in the government, in the BMC, in the state government. So Mr. Aditya Thackeray is standing on the side of the environmentalists, but it's his party's government. So what credibility does the voter attach to that? We don't know.
Somehow, Kaushik, one last question, and again, I may be wrong here. Maybe I have not followed it as closely, but somehow it gave me a feeling that this time around it was not Mr. Modi's persona necessarily driving the interest for the state voters. They were probably trying to let
so I've been trying to
state guys take center stage.
I've been trying to ask people that the fact that if there is a mandate that is heavily in favor of the BJP this time around, does that make Devendra Fadnavis a leader that has come out of Mr. Modi's shadow?
That's my question.
And as likewise for Mr. Khattar, because remember 5 years ago, you might have heard Amit Shah say things like double engine growth. What they meant is have a BJP government at the center and the state. Now, this is the first template. Maharashtra and Haryana were the first 2 states after the Lok Sabha election that went for the BJP. So how much is the voters subscribing to that double engine theory that the BJP has proposed over the last 5 years? This is the first template. And if there is a mandate in favor of the incumbent government, how much of that gets attributed to the person who's run the state for the last 5 years?
I mean, is the conversation around that it's maybe the person at the state and not necessarily...
The extent of the tally will say that, Neeraj, because that said, you've had a statewide rally, yatra as they call it, that Mr. Fadnavis has done. But in the slog overs, it was Mr. Modi who came down across the state and spent the last week in rallies across the state.
Somehow, this time around, it just seemed that it was not Mr. Modi all over.
That's right.
But maybe Devendra Fadnavis and maybe...
just to finish this off, it's probably also their sense of how close this is.
Yeah, that's
Given
true.
how close Gujarat was, he carpet bombed Gujarat for the last 10 days.
That's true.
And only then did the BJP manage to squeak out a win.
Yeah, well, all pertinent points and difficult to distill that if the BJP win in Maharashtra, with the presumption that they go ahead and win, as the exit polls are suggesting, if the BJP win is very large, would the credit go to Devendra Fadnavis or would the credit go to the BJP machinery at large, both at the center and the state level? But Kaushik Vaidya, thank you so much for bringing that to us.
We'll keep getting updates through the day.
Most important. Thank you so much for that. Okay, that's all that we have on First Word today, but lots more lined up on Indian Open. We asked Sanjay Mukim of Bank of America Merrill Lynch where he is placing his bets in the current environment as we approach the Dhanteras and Diwali, and discuss earnings with Sachin Tikekar of KPIT Technologies and Vibha Padalkar of HDFC Life Insurance. But after this break, a full tilt towards the immediate day's trade.